Welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. The COVID pandemic not only battered Hong Kong's public health system, but also brought the city's 344,000 small and medium-sized businesses to their knees. Financial Secretary Paul Chan is the one everyone turns to for government measures in this year's budget to lessen their burden. Industry insiders also scrutinized the budget for resources and initiatives to strengthen Hong Kong's economic growth and competitiveness. Let's bring in Janssen Chan, co-chairperson of CPA Australia's Taxation Committee. Thank you very much, Janssen, for returning to Talk the Walk, joining us to discuss this year's budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sarah.
Just very briefly, right off the bat, we are in a different situation than last year. Now we have tighter social distancing measures. We have better economic position, but we have raging inflation right now. How is that difference reflected in this year's budget?
Basically, in brief, I personally very welcomes to Paul Chan's budget this year because they have lots of different relief measures for SME as well as for individuals. So it's a pretty good budget this year, actually.
So one of the centerpieces of this year's budget is obviously the $10,000 e-voucher, electronic voucher that the Financial Secretary announced. Now, last year, the rollout of the 5,000 e-voucher was more about stimulating the economy, while COVID is largely at bay. But like I said before, we are in a different situation right now, and lawmakers and grassroots residents alike call for the government to give out cash instead. They think that's more effective in helping those who are suffering in the economy. What do you think?
Well, let me briefly let you know what we had suggested to the government previously first. Now, we suggest to the government previously two-tier version of e-voucher with a total amount of $6,000. Now, the first tiers will be $3,000 for everyone in Hong Kong. The second tiers is another additional $3,000 for the low-income earners. We suggest this two-tier version on the basis that the e-voucher should have been more targeted to people who are in need. But of course, now the good news is we are in a surplus position with $18.9 billion with e-vouchers of $10,000 for everyone. So it's more than what we had suggested. So everyone's happy.
Do you think that this version that you suggested will be more helpful than the government announced?
Well, I think the government is actually giving out like $10,000 to everyone. So it's more than what we expected. Of course, if he can accept our recommendation to target more the grassroots people, like the underprivileged groups, that would be even more better.
But then the government, now it's clear that the government did not go down that road. And what would you suggest it do otherwise to help those maybe who are bearing more brunt from the pandemic than the others?
Well, I think the problem is because the government, they have like other considerations, and the $10,000 is I think is more than what we have suggested, as I mentioned previously, because we suggest it's only $3,000 to everyone and additional $3,000 to the grassroots people. So now it's actually, they are having across the board, they're actually spending $10,000. So I think this is a pretty good spending for people who are having problems in Hong Kong right now. So I think this policy can be further enhanced if, as I said, if they can separate a kind of portions to the grassroots people and the underprivileged group. So it would be much more better, but because of we have limited resources, Sarah. So it would be hard to have like given out like more than $10,000 to everyone.
Understood. So you mentioned you basically advised the government to be more targeted in directing and distributing its limited resources. Now, let's look at other one-off relief measures, including, for example, a salaries tax cut of up to $10,000, 1,000 electricity tariff subsidy for every household, and a public transport subsidy, etc. Well, I'm afraid these are some of the measures that are certainly welcome to have. Nobody will say no to subsidy, but those measures from the government standpoint have limited large-scale impact on the economy, and maybe it's slow to actually have some impact and benefit in boosting the economy, but at the same time could substantially set back the public coffers, the public expense. Do you think that portion of resources can be better used, and how the government should utilize that?
Well, back to your point, there are other relief measures that you have said correctly. We have the raise concession. We have also the 100% personal loan guarantee scheme, the reduced salary tax up to $10,000, transportation subsidies, and residential electricity subsidies. But don't forget, we also have the temporary unemployment relief this year for the first time. So, and also for the consumption voucher, the e-voucher, which if you remember last year, we have like $5,000 e-voucher spreading over 5-month period. We had a contribution of 0.7% to the GDP. This year, as announced by the government, it would be 1.2% to a contribution to the GDP, as the e-voucher amount has been doubled to $10,000.
So you think that, yes, despite the e-voucher and the one-off relief measures may not be as targeted as many would have wanted, but it could still have a positive effect on Hong Kong's economy?
Definitely.
All right, well, we talk about small and medium-sized businesses. Now let's talk about that. We know that one of the measures that the government announced to support entrepreneurs and businesses is called rental enforcement moratorium. Basically, it's like a delayed in rent payments in a sort of relief. Now, some industry advisors said these are not enough to help the businesses, especially without a guarantee that the pandemic will subside after a certain amount of months, 3 months, 6 months, we don't know. Is there more you suggest the government should do to assure the SMEs instead of just delaying their payment, but without knowing, without certainty that how the pandemic will go in the future?
Sarah, this is quite a controversial topic, and it's top of the tongue in this 2 weeks' time. Some say it's good, and some say it's bad. So you see, the comments are quite polarized. The government is trying to protect the SME in Hong Kong, basically. As you know, there are more than 350,000 SME, and they employ approximately 45% of the private sector's workforce. So they have to be protected, Sarah. So my comment is, the logic and the real intention behind this measure is good, because this really helps the SME in a way that is not to pay rent for at least 3 months. This is helpful to the SME in this hard time. But having said that, these measures needs to be considered seriously. I mean, the government should also consider the impact of these measures we have on various stakeholders, such as the landlord and the bank. Now, I don't know whether this will change people's perception, as there are a few updates from Paul this week, early this week. That scheme has now been further enhanced. Now, one of them, rates will also be deferred under this measure. And if landlord encounter any difficulties and fail to repay their mortgage due to the impact of this measure, it is now stipulated in the law that mortgage moratorium will be allowed by the banks. And for elderly landlords who mainly rely on the rental income for survival, the government will provide them with a loan at an amount of up to 3 months of the rental with a cap at $100,000. And of course, which is interest-free. Now, with this enhancement, hopefully, this topic will be cooled down gradually. Now, alternatively, in our suggestions to the government, they may also consider our recommendation by providing a tax incentive to the landlord so as to encourage them to reduce rent for tenants.
Now, I understand the need to take fiscal responsibility into consideration, especially for policymakers. But as the government official and in your position as a business leader, how do you convince your fellow entrepreneurs and fellow business owners that something is better than nothing, and without coming across as insensitive to their struggle? Because some of them obviously tell you that I need more to survive.
Well, I have asked some of the SME friends about this policy recently,
Right.
and some of them are welcome because at least they said we don't have to put our focus on, making the rent to pay to the landlord. At least they can put their focus more on business. Although some of them are closed, that's another story. But if you're still in business, you can actually try to find other ways to survive. But at least you can. It's a backlog kind of payment that you need to do it later on.
All right. Well, Janssen, that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much for joining the program again, and please come back.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.